Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today, one of the best in the business at his job in Canadian basketball is here to join the show. Toronto Raptors play-by-play man, Matt Devlin. Matt, thanks for being on today. It's super exciting to talk Raptors basketball with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate you asking me to be on, and you're all set there. You got the right background and everything, and you're ready to go. I know that.
Well, I think the quote goes, dress for the job you want. So I always try to emulate the people who have laid the groundwork for such amazing, they have done such amazing work to allow us to be inspired to try to achieve what they achieve with the people that work at TSN, at Sportsnet. So I always try to dress sharp because I know that that's what's necessary in the business.
I like it. I like it. I like it. You're looking good.
Well, and same to you as well. You got the great background there. You got a championship hat I see behind you and a little Larry O'Brien trophy.
Yeah, there's finals, a couple of other different, things up there, championship hat and the Larry O.B. and a couple of awards and all that good stuff, So I used to never have, that sort of stuff here. Of course, I'd never been with an organization that had won an NBA title, but since that time, I figured, let's go ahead and, put all those things, there. So it's kind of worked out, so.
It's worked out pretty well. And an interesting fact that the listener may not know is that your origins didn't necessarily start in basketball. Way back in the day after graduating from Boston College, you had some opportunities to work in baseball and do a few other different things at the minor league levels. Now looking back on everything you've done in the NBA, it seems, I'm sure, like many moons ago that you were down in the South in Texas doing baseball commentary. And baseball is an interesting sport to cover when it comes to play-by-play because it's a sport where people play all the time. How do you reflect now on like your experience with working baseball games compared to doing basketball?
Well, I think number one, great research on your part, which is always key. But it's important to get on the air, right? And so I had a couple of different internships, didn't make, any money. And one of them was working some side jobs. And my first job was Abilene, Texas, as a weekend sports anchor at KRBC. And I was there for about 18 months and really wanted to expand my horizons. And that's when I really started thinking about play-by-play. And I was fortunate enough in 1992 to get an internship with the Springfield Cardinals, which at that point was a Midwest League team that played under the St. Louis Cardinals. And Dimitri Young, who made it to the big leagues, John Mabry, they were on that team and they had a really good year. But for me, it was starting to learn the craft of calling play-by-play. And one of the things a couple of things were said to me early on. Number one, go to a small town and work your way up. And I ended up in Abilene, Texas. And then when it came to play-by-play, it was how many games, right? What sport offers you the most games? And obviously baseball, right? The minor league baseball season was 142. So when I messed up the next night, there was another game. I didn't have to wait a week. There weren't 2 or 3 games a week, as we know in high school football or basketball or college football and basketball, there aren't as many games. So that was really my first introduction, was just getting games. And I spent nearly 7 years calling minor league baseball, but along with that, a host of other things, right? I was a sales rep for each one of the teams, as well as a media director for each one of the teams. I also worked high school football and basketball. I worked college, football and basketball on radio, and just did as many different things as I could because you have to get experience. And my road to the NBA really first happened with getting an opportunity in the WNBA. in 1999. And then from there, NBA Entertainment, which ran NBA TV, started. It was called NBA.com TV. They started in a studio in Secaucus, New Jersey, and they hired me. It's actually Adam Silver was the head of NBA Entertainment, who's now the commissioner. He hired me to work NBA TV, and I was more of a host at that point on TV, but still always wanted to do play-by-play. So I would continue to do play-by-play, whether it be for the Atlantic 10 network or ESPN, Madison Square Garden network, just a whole host. I never turned down a play-by-play opportunity, whether it be boxing. I've done Olympics where, I'd never called wrestling before, and I, did wrestling. I would, whatever it was, if it allowed me that opportunity to be on the air and learn a craft and try to get better at it, I would do.
Doing a variety of sports, as you mentioned, is great for getting lots of reps. And I think it was the very great Vince Scully who said, if you want to become a broadcaster, you got to get on air, you got to get tons of reps, and you got to do sports, like you mentioned, baseball, that play very often. How do you compare your experience with calling a sport like baseball with a sport like wrestling, which you had no experience, to basketball, which you were a lot more familiar with?
Sports, and you reference Vince Scully. I'll never forget. It was Bob Costas had a show called Later with Bob Costas. We were an NBC affiliate in 1991 in Abilene, Texas, and we didn't carry Later with Bob Costas, but they aired it in the control room, and I went back and watched it, and it was Vince Scully and Bob Costas talking about, if you want to be a great announcer, you need to try your hand at play-by-play. And baseball, managing time in baseball, is a craft. And as I reflect back and look at all the different sports, there's a rhythm to each, right? And it's finding that rhythm that ultimately allows you to have a delivery that enables you to call those different games. And basketball is definitely more like hockey. You're following the basketball, you're following the puck. It's rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat typically. Football is, down distance, right? It's, first down and 10 from the 25-yard line, right? And you make the play call, the analyst comes in, and now it's second down and 6. Now, some of that has changed with the hurry up offenses and guys immediately, especially college, getting to the line and looking constantly to the sideline to make that play call. But it's finding that rhythm. And in baseball, it's creating that picture specifically on radio. And, the right-hander looks in, comes set at the belt, batter, left-handed batter, digs in, softly with his right foot. The wind's blowing left to right, right? Here's a pitch, swung on, ground ball hit sharply to second, scooped up by the second baseman and throws over to first base, out by 2 steps, right? And so it's finding that rhythm. And baseball has more of a sense of, like you and I sitting here talking, you have that 3 hours of that conversation, and then it's that immediacy of a big play. And, can you be on it? Swung on, ball, hit into the gap, into left center field, right? Rolls all the way to the wall. And, and then you get into the description of all of what happens there. So each sport to me helps you in the other one, basketball, because things are just a burst, right? It's Fred, boom, shot, good, right? It's just like these bursts, and in each sport will have those moments, and it's recognizing, when those moments happen. And it's, look, it's I say to all the young broadcasters that I talk to, there's never a perfect broadcast. And you walk away and, you think back like, okay, hey, made a mistake here. How would I get better at doing this? I still watch, a lot of my games. to get a feel and a sense of, what can I do to get better? So there's never been a perfect show, and you just try to do the best you can and, provide entertainment and information, to the fans.
When you get to work alongside a great partner like Jack Armstrong, you guys seem to have a great amount of fun, even if the game doesn't go the way that the Raptors would like. And even if, like you said, the broadcast doesn't always perfect, maybe for the fans watching at home, they don't really notice any of those things. But for yourself, you'll notice a lot more and understand the elements behind the scenes. How do you reflect on games after they're done? And what are some of the things that you look to do to improve upon broadcasts and your craft within the ins and outs of every game during a season? Because it's still very long for basketball.
Yeah, it's, you have 82 games, and I would say this, that I always have lived by the game dictates where you go. And if it's a tight game, you're on that game, you're broadcasting every moment, every stitch of that game. And that's why in the playoffs, right, you're on, every single possession. And during the regular season, you are as well. However, there are games that the lead will grow, and it allows you to interject, have a little bit of fun, and do some different things to continue to entertain. So hopefully the eyeballs and the fans are still watching. And I think that, there's been some things through time with the information age that we're in that have adjusted, right? I mean, number one, when I started in the league, when I started broadcasting, there wasn't, nobody had cell phones, forget about, the internet. And, the big thing was getting stats off of a fax machine, and you would type in this number and they'd spit out, the stats and stuff. And so, but through that, there's an evolution, right? Tonight when I'm broadcasting a game, you can look up certain things. So it almost, to me, puts you in a spot as a play-by-play announcer of, call the action, right? Call the action in front of you. And so the game dictates where you're going to go. Call the action. And if a bucket happens, even if you're in the middle of a story, still, recognize that, right? Try to do some things that'll draw people up from their phone as they're watching to the action, right? And that's the same thing in football and baseball. And when I filled in with the Jays, I felt I was cognizant of that, right? Baseball game can be lengthy, and how do you draw the fan back into it with a, certain kind of call based upon the action that's happening? And so, those are the sort of different things that you think about. The rules of the game of basketball specifically, as we talk about basketball here, have changed. There's more possessions than ever before. So the action going up and down the court is faster than it ever has been, which means that if you do have something to say, you got to say it, like that. And the lengthy stories that you may be able to have told 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20, there's really not much time for it anymore. I'm looking down now. Okay, so the Raptors, they're fifth in the league in shot attempts at 91. Okay, and 91.3 to be exact. And then Phoenix tonight, that's who the Raptors are playing, they're seventh at 89.7, right? So, I mean, those are a lot of shots that are going up in the course of the game. And then, as we know, basketball teams aren't working the clock the way they used to. Mm-hmm. Now it's, early offense. What are you getting in the first 5 seconds, 8 seconds on the break? Certainly with the Raptors, are the best teams out on the break. So all those things are things that you think about, as a broadcaster, right? And it takes time and takes some, self-analysis of, hey, how you want, but then also, talking to our producer and director just about, okay, what can we fit in? What can't we fit in? As well as talking with, Jack and Alvin and Amy, what can we, fit in here? What can't we fit in? All those things based upon the amount of time that you have, within the flow of the game based on the possessions. It's that's kind of like the inside of the inside, right? But those are all things that you reflect on.
The way that the game of basketball evolves is so interesting to know and to see, like from your perspective, as you're saying, the intricacies of how the shots are at an all-time high for number of possessions, shots they're getting off, how much faster it goes. And even if you look at the way the basketball is played in the 80s or the flow of a broadcast in the 80s compared to now, you look at some of the different things that commentators are starting to incorporate. I know that Eric Collins in Charlotte, where you used to work with the Bobcats in the mid 2000s, has been known for his electric personality, and fans gravitate towards it. And that's the thing with, some teams are going to attract bigger audiences than others. With Charlotte being a bit of a smaller market, what can they do to create a more entertaining broadcast, to do something that's more memorable? And what Eric has been doing there is fantastic. And what you've been doing with Toronto, with listing several different Canadian cities, communities, and areas that people can identify with, it's something that they look forward to when they watch the broadcast. So when did you start to pick up on some of those little tendencies to make the broadcast more unique for viewers?
Yes. So I think it's part of just like the evolution. I mean, I remember doing things to tie into the community when I was announcing single A baseball in Lake Elsinore, California. But, part of it is, just entertaining the crowd. There's a connection always with a hometown team and the fans. You want to do that. And I don't think about those things all that much. I let a lot of that emerge and just appear in the broadcast. I have all these different stats and all these different notes that I write down, but I don't ever write down, hey, I got to be excited if I say, or I got to say this. I mean, there's only been, really 2 times that I've ever, said, okay, I have to try to work this in. Okay. And that was during the championship year, which I'll get to. But the rest of it, like the cities and stuff like that, people will, tweet or, Instagram, DM or whatever. And can you mention this city, that city? And then I have a lot of people that just come up and ask, for, a shout out, of a specific city. And the first time I used it was, I want to say probably 7 seasons ago with Kyle Lowry. And I think Mississauga was the first shot because it was so far away, recently. And I remember doing this as well with Kyle in a push for his all-star potential appearance, which he ended up making 6 consecutive, just having some fun with that. And recently I've been doing, Freddie All-Star, right? It just, a shot went up, he made it. I said, Freddie All-Star. And then all of a sudden I was just like, hey, this, going to stick and I'm going to use it a little bit. And maybe that's going to draw some attention to Fred. Nobody asked me to say it. Nobody, with the Raptors said, oh, hey, you need to promote Fred or anything. I think Fred is very deserving of it. And so, with Van Vliet, which is, in his name, you got Van, then you got Vliet, and then you go All-Star, right? So it's like Freddie All-Star and just, having some fun with that. And a lot of different things, bucket and book it, maybe I say a little bit more lasting, throughout broadcasts. But I've said certain things and fans will say, hey, why aren't you using that again? It's like, I try not to always use the same thing. I want to try to do different things. Obviously there is with the cities, that is something that is reoccurring, but I'm there for 82 games. And like this Freddie All-Star is going to be a short window, right? Because, it's between now and when the All-Star game is and when the voting happens. And you just come up with just different things and you kind of, you let it ride. Right. But I also say this, that I think that, and I remember a broadcaster told me this, Charlie Jones, who worked years ago for NBC when they had NFL and did Olympics and stuff. And I remember introducing myself to him and early on in my career. And I was actually on the same plane as he was. I was in the back, he was up in first class, and I was able to work my way up and introduce myself to him. And I was doing minor league baseball at the time, I think. But he said, remember, ultimately, you'll become the broadcaster and announcer that you like to hear, And so as I'm sitting and watching a game, there are moments to me that, you just want to bring that energy. And then I also think that when you think about what we've all been going through over the last couple of years too, that there's an opportunity, in a 2.5 hour window to, provide some fun. So that to me is important. And real quick, I'll get back to a couple of things I mentioned earlier about writing things down. There are times when we get to the playoffs that I'll jot down, some thoughts setting up a game, right? Game one, 2019, NBA Eastern Conference playoffs, Orlando Magic against the, Toronto Raptors, and then provide maybe a context, within that. But as far as like even writing down the cities and having idea of these are the cities that I'm going to say tonight. Now, there are times where I write it down because I'm looking at Twitter and somebody's asking me, hey, can you mention Brampton? Right. And so I'll go, okay, Brampton, I'm going to write that down just so I kind of remember. But other than that, game one of the NBA finals against Golden State, I didn't write down, but I purposely shouted out all 13 capitals, obviously the 10 for the province and then the 3 for the territories. And just so happened that they made 13 threes. If they had made 12, I don't know which one would have been left out. And if they made 14, and not too many people, I don't think, really picked up on what I did, a couple of people. And then the second time, game two, I shouted out a lot of the cities that the current number, and at that time, maybe 17, 18, now it's up over 20, that Canadian players that are currently in the NBA, what cities they either were born in or grew up in. I use that kind of but the only time that at the end of a game, everything that we do is ad lib, right? Actions happening in front. That's why I love doing it, right? We have a set plan of who we're going to talk about tonight in the pregame show and in the open. And that could change last minute, depending upon who's in, who's out of the game. And then when the game starts, I have the starting lineups, and it's going to be, Phoenix and Toronto for the first time, this season. And Raptors have won 6 in a row. Phoenix begins a 5-game road trip. And so you kind of set the stage there, and you let it go. The only time that I ever really thought about what I was going to say at the end of a broadcast was game 6 of the NBA finals. That was one that I remember, game 5, not wanting myself to think about it, maybe almost as a fan, right? You didn't want to jinx it.
Of course.
But I remember after game 5, running into Nick Nurse after the game, and because Kyle, as you may recall, had that opportunity to win it. And Draymond Green just got a little piece of the basketball, redirected it, and hit the side of the backboard. And I kind of looked at Nick. I was like, and he's like, that's all right, Matty. We'll get the next one. We'll get this. And so I thought to myself as I was going home that I'm like, okay, maybe I got to start thinking about this. And so about 1:30 in the morning, 2 in the morning, they sent a text, be at the airport at 9 a.m. to fly out to San Francisco. That was a Tuesday morning. So I kind of started to think about it on that flight out there. Okay, what am I going to say? And then that Wednesday, obviously you're prepping for the game, and Thursday on the way over there is when I really thought about, I need to say something, short, and I need to say something that, you can put an exclamation point on it, but also really brings together everything that this special ride was about over the course of 2 months, and then, provide, that moment of what exactly did happen, right? And then, let it breathe and let the pictures show. And so I really started to reflect on what that 2-month journey was like for everybody in Canada. And that's when I came up with the NBA, Canada, the NBA title is yours. And I wanted it to be, kind of short, right to the point, but then also I felt like that provided everybody, kind of, I don't know, captured the moment. And at least I thought in my mind. And so, and then after you say that, it's, what did they accomplish, right? So it was, the Toronto Raptors are the 2019 NBA champions. And then the other stuff I said in there, it's real, it happened, and all that. I don't even know where any of that, the other thing is that I didn't want to say it until the clock struck 0.
Of course.
Because there had been a lot of different, the games had kind of had a lot of different things happening. So that's when, Steph Curry lets it fly, and then, Canada, the NBA title is yours. And I wrote that down. I just wrote down, Canada, the NBA title is yours. And I wrote that down on an index card. And I just kind of, put it there off to the left side of me. And that was it. And those are the only other times. And in between all of that, the ball going up, and that, you're just reacting to Kyle Lowry having a great start as he did in Game 6, and, calling the game and describing what you're seeing in front of you.
When you mention the 2019 NBA Finals Game 6, it brings back a lot of memories for me, for someone who grew up watching the Raptors my entire life and having never seen them win a playoff series of 7 games or more, and then having seen them do it a few times and just capturing that moment. It was just so odd for Raptors fans, I think, because as Canadians, we're used to seeing you and Jack on the call on TSN, on Sportsnet. But then when the games were actually being broadcast by ABC and Mike Breen was on the call, it was just like a worlds collide kind of deal. And the way that you encapsulated, Canada, the NBA title is yours, versus Mike Breen just saying, well, there's a new NBA champion and we the North are now we the champs. It was just, even though Mike Breen is a legend of NBA broadcasts, the way that you encapsulated it and made it feel Canadian was something that was so memorable. The same way that I'm sure another moment, Kawhi's shot just stunned and sent shockwaves across the entire league, not just Raptors fans. In a moment like that, when Kawhi hit the shot to knock off the 76ers, was that something that you had maybe anticipated, or maybe not anticipated he was going to hit the shot, but you were thinking to yourself, okay, well, there's a few notes that I want to make sure to touch upon, like hanging 18 years in the air? Or was that something that was just completely ad-libbed from what you had been talking about building up to the Game 7 against the Sixers?
Well, a couple different things. Mike Breen is a dear friend and a phenomenal broadcaster, as we all know. And he's, somebody that, in my career early on when I was working in New York, was, a great friend. And he, and I remember he had done some games in the Atlantic 10 network, and he was getting more TV games for the New York Knicks. This is late 90s, and he wasn't going to be able to do the Atlantic 10 anymore. And he made a call on my behalf, which was nice, unbeknownst to me. When they asked him, like, hey, is there anybody that you can think of? And he said, yeah, Matt Devlin and Doris Burke. And so Matt, Doris and I worked the A10 games together. And at that time I was doing New York Liberty, filling in on the New York Knicks, like pre and post game shows, and everybody has a different style, and at the end there's a little bit of a different, right? And he would, he does the Knicks as well as, ESPN, ABC, and so there is a slight difference in your call when you go network or when you're doing your home team, and the same Kevin Harlan's, a friend as well. And I worked, for many years, doing playoff games for Turner, and he had a tremendous call, and he's one of the best too. There's so many great announcers out there. But as it pertains to, the call in Game 7, at that point, it's really, you go back into the fundamentals of broadcasting, which is, time, score, and what will the shot mean, right? So we know that is 4.2 on the clock, 90 to 90. And then if he makes it, Raptors win. And if he misses it, we're going to overtime. So that was it, right? It was time, score, 4.2 on the clock, timeouts left, no timeouts left, fouls to give, no fouls to give. You get all the basics down. And then, Kawhi turns the corner. They switch off, right? Simmons and Bede, and, fires over top. And, there was at that point, everything's ad lib, and then tying in the 18 years and all of that had just been, something that was kind of a line locally, right through. Mm-hmm. That would not have been something that, more than likely, if you're broadcasting from a U.S. network standpoint, that you would. But that I knew here in Canada, that was a conversation, right? That was happening. The shot against Philly and Vince, and so, I don't know. It just tied it in, right? It kind of bounced, suspended in air, and, goes through. And where Leo and I are kind of looking at it after like the second bounce, I thought to myself, this has got a chance, but all that happens so fast, right?
Oh yeah.
That, outside of time, score, and what that shot means, that's, really important in those times, and then also to understand that silence from an announcer is sometimes a really powerful thing, because, that reaction that we saw from Kawhi and the crowd, and, was just amazing. And I, yearn for those days, with the crowd there, and just that energy and the feel. But, those are things that I think that you'll learn as a broadcaster. I have a lot of notes for this evening's game, and a lot of stuff, jotted down here, and early on as a broadcaster, you have a tendency to want to get everything that you have written down in. And sometimes they're only good for one game. But, as you get older and more comfortable and what have you, you kind of understand, hey, the game does, as I mentioned earlier, dictate where you want to go. And I know I'm rambling on a little bit, but like every day I have, this is the Eastern Conference standings, Western Conference standings. I'll add some further notes when I get to the arena, but I keep track of, that sort of stuff, and just, different notes and different things that I have in my book that I can kind of go back and look at and keep track of. And, and then you have all this stuff right here, and then you let it fly.
And it's all just, that's the magic of how it happens, is when you think back, and just even seeing the smile on your face and you're reflecting on the shot that Kawhi hit is just something that, people talk about how sports unites us all. And those moments, those Canadian heritage moments, for lack of a better term, are ones that will stick with us forever. And even for someone like yourself, who's originally from Syracuse, but is like Jack as well, has been adopted into the family of Canadian basketball and Canada at large as a whole. Those are moments that we'll never forget. And honestly, the ones we live for, because that's what makes the game so exciting.
Well, look at that's, ultimately, those moments are why I, years earlier decided to, get out of the studio and be on site to call a game. And, we all had, that was just a remarkable, special journey and we all have, as I reflect upon it, we all had, each of us, our own, different kind of experience through that time. And, the ability to gather together to watch the games. And during that time, my family and I, between game 1 and game 2, were sworn in as Canadian citizens. So, it was a process that had started years before, and then officially, like 2 years prior, 18 months prior. And then ultimately taking, the citizenship test. I want to say it was before game 3, maybe the day before game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals. No, it was game 2, maybe. Anyway, all of that was happening at the same time, which made it really special. And, then, between game 1 and game 2, getting sworn in, and then, getting my Canadian passport, and traveling on that, the second time we went, back there for game 6. So it was, just a special time. And I think during all of that, I thought to myself, there's others that are going through and have their own stories. And to your point, that's what kind of connects us all. And it made that run, extra special, very much like, the Blue Jays and their run, when, they dominated, as we know, baseball, in the early 90s. And it just brought the city and it brought a country together. And that, those are the special moments and times. And then, of course, the parade and just everything that followed was, just amazing.
So, Matt, we are getting towards the end of our time in today's episode. So I want to wrap up with a few more quick questions to have a little bit more fun before we go.
I'll try to give you a quick answer instead of the long ones that I've been giving you.
No problem. No problem. We're having fun either way. So my first question for you is, who are your top 3 favorite broadcasters from when you were growing up?
Jack Buck would be number 1. He was the voice of the St. Louis Cardinals, but also did, football. Bob Costas would be there. There's so many, Marv Albert from an NBA standpoint, but then prior to that, Chick Hearn with the Los Angeles Lakers. When I was doing minor league baseball, I think he was, unbeknownst to him, very influential, because he really provided a lot of that entertainment sort of stuff, right? And I'll never forget meeting him as a rookie announcer in the NBA, and he was impactful. There's a lot of really good announcers out there. And, Al Michaels is, one of the best of all time. And so there's too many, but I'll leave those names right there.
Who are your favorite athletes in these respective sports growing up as a kid? Football, basketball, and baseball.
My number 1 favorite all time was actually from a different sport, boxing, and that was Muhammad Ali. I loved Muhammad Ali as a kid growing up. Football growing up was Roger Staubach. It's too long of a story to tell you, but I am no longer a Dallas Cowboys fan. But Roger Staubach, I ended up getting his autograph when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and that kind of turned me in for a long stretch until Tom Landry was let go into a Cowboy fan. Baseball, interestingly enough, it was Bucky Dent of the New York Yankees. He was a shortstop. And then For basketball, I was born in Syracuse, but, you know, moved to New York City and was there up until I was 10 before we moved to California and then to Tennessee. And then, so New York, it was, Clyde, right. And that was, somebody that, you certainly, thought about um, and always enjoyed watching, but then, the 80s, when I was out of an NBA market as a kid, the 80s were really dominated with that game of the week, which always seemed to be the Celtics and the Lakers. And, loved watching Magic play and loved Bird, and just, how those, battles would go back and forth.
And my final question for you is this: how has becoming a father changed your perspective on your job and or sports in general?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, I think you always want to be cognizant of, or maybe I do, when I'm calling a game, there are certain things you can say that are factual, and then there are certain things that are opinion based, and certain things, that you can be critical of, but you are cognizant of, family members, right? And I think that there's a little bit of that in there, maybe, of, you know, of thinking about, if, because I remember, like you travel with teams, right? And so whatever you say, there'll be a point where, hey, you said X, Y, Z, and I've had to, on a few occasions say, yes, I did, but is that a fact? And like, well, yeah, that was a fact. You've I remember in the minor leagues, a guy came up to me and said, hey, why did you say that on the radio last night? And I said, well, because you have given up the most home runs in the league, and because, yeah, but that does, I said, look I, love you as a guy. You're a great guy, go grab a coffee. Well, but that's a fact, right? That's not my opinion, right? That's, and so you always, if you are being critical, is it fact-based, right? And maybe I'm cognizant of that. Is that because of my kids or not? I don't know, but I do, have sons that play, and I do have my older son's a student manager with the University of Iowa basketball team, and I have a son that plays out in the BCHL. So, I'll listen to, their broadcasts, and a younger son, that plays hockey as well, and listen to their games, what have you. So you're always, I don't know if you're always, but, just kind of listen and say, okay, hey, are you being fair to everybody? Maybe that's it, but that's a good question.
And being fair that's as good a thing that we can do as sports fans, and as parents, of course, of athletes that play various sports. It's always something important to consider.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, it's been a lot of fun. And I'll say this, when you think about that, I think back about Tampa. And I know during a lot of broadcast, fans would be like, well, you're making an excuse for them. And I was like, okay, they showed up to Tampa a week and a half, 2 weeks prior to the start of training camp. You're trying to move your family, if you have kids of school age, you're trying to find a school. Your whole world is upended. It's not like you're coming back to Toronto for many of those players that are familiar with Toronto. And then, I know that at that time, not that they would make excuses, but these are just the realities of life. They get off to a 2-10 start, and then all of a sudden they get back to 17-17. And then, as we know, unfortunately, a wave, went through the team. They were in health and safety protocols and all that. And you're coming back from that. And those aren't excuses. Those are just real life things that are happening. And in those moments, be fair to the fact that, that despite the fact that you're a professional, there are still things that are out there that, you think about, okay, if you had to if you had a job and all of a sudden they changed your corporate headquarters to another city and you had all of, a week to get quote unquote settled in before your job started, how would you be responding all the time? Like, it's not, as cut and dry, right? So, those moments, I think you try to be fair. And the same thing here, coming back here, Raptors, are experiencing something that no other team has to experience right now, right? And that's no fans in the stands, and they've responded. They've won 6 in a row. They played well, but even through all that, there's only been one game this season that they've had a full complement of players of their top 8. And yet here they are, 3 games over 500. And so, kind of having some of that perspective sometimes helps. And then sometimes it's, fans will still say, hey, you're making an excuse for them, but that's okay too. I'm just happy that, they're back here in Toronto playing and the team's playing well.
That's the most important thing that they can control. And they have another one tonight against the Suns. And that's what we're looking forward to, is to seeing how they're going to continue their performance as well. And Fred VanVleet's bid for an all-star appearance this year.
Freddie All-Star.
There you go. Book it. Matt, first I want to acknowledge you for all the great work that you've done for the Raptors and during your career in the NBA, and also as well with the WNBA and the minor leagues in baseball. You're someone that served as an inspiration to many Canadians, whether it comes to broadcasting or basketball, especially as the growth of basketball continues to surge in this country. And there is one little bonus feature I want to share with you before we part for today officially.
Okay.
So can you see the screen here?
I can see it.
Okay. So specifically within myself, I have always wanted to be a broadcaster since I started watching sports when I was a kid. And when I started watching basketball, it just turned that you and Jack were now on the call, and it had transitioned from Chuck Swirsky. So there was a specific moment that really sticks with me that I want to always thank you for. And it was when my brothers and I got the opportunity to meet you when we were at the Raptors game in Minnesota in 2011. I don't know how my parents set it up or how that even happened. I was only 15 years old, but you shouted out our family on the broadcast, considering we almost died driving through a whiteout from Winnipeg to Minneapolis to watch a game. And even though the Raptors didn't win, it's a moment that has stuck with me for my entire life, and is something that is part of the inspiration for me wanting to work in broadcasting and sports. So I really want to thank you for that, because it is something that I really, truly cherish.
Well, thank you very much. It's extremely meaningful, actually, to me that you brought that up and remember that time. And I do remember in 2011, right? A lot of fans from Manitoba coming down, and there was a horrible storm, and all the Raptor fans dominated that arena. It was all Raptor fans, and I remember Jack and I, that night, spending a lot of time with a lot of fans. But it's awesome, and thankful, obviously, that you were able to get out there, and you're right there on the court. That's a good thing, and I appreciate your kind words, and continued success to you. You're on your way, and as I always say, you got to be patiently persistent. I know it sounds kind of funny and crazy, but you just got to be persistent. But you also have to be patient in knowing that your time will come, and be and make sure that, as that persistence keeps going and you keep striving, that you keep getting better, and use that time, use it well. So, but anyway, that's great. I'm glad you still have that photo. That's good.
Yeah, it's
Thank
one
you for
that's
sharing that.
Oh, of course. And I always do my best to act in the way that I know professionals do, but I know that within each of us sports fans, there's always those moments that we remember, and whether it be the autograph from Roger Staubach, or, you know, however fans get to interact with those that they look up to when they're growing up. It's always something I think that's important to remember, because it shows that we're human, you know, that as much as we love
Yeah.
to work in the industry, it's also great to be able to admire those that have come before us and have done the work that inspires us to be where we are.
Well, yeah, no, certainly. And thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing that story with me.
Matt, thanks again for your time. It was greatly appreciated. And I'm really glad that we had got the opportunity to have a lot of fun today talking about NBA basketball and about your career.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it, and continued success.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with Toronto Raptors play-by-play, Matt Devlin.